rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events. This is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective. Well, we are within 1 week away from the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the document that got us on our path to where we are today, 250 years later. And that means, of course, that we have a 3-day weekend because the 4th falls on a Saturday this year. And so it will be observed on Friday. But don't worry, folks. I am planning on, barring any complications, I am planning on having shows throughout the week because some people, like Dan Bongino, can afford to take a week off. Boy, he screwed up my whole morning. Anyway, he can afford to take a week off. No, seriously, he deserves a vacation. That's all I got to say. Well, I need to get a stinger or something that has, you remember the old ABC logo, The More You Know, and it would have the star going across the screen? Yeah, I think I need one of those. Because before we get going on the show, and before, I'm telling you, you guys have got to sign up for Rumble, all right? You got to sign up for it. You got to get over there. You got to get into the chat. Because if you get in the chat, you'll be able to have fantastic knowledge and understanding come out from all of my Whiskey Warrior P1s. So here is an example. One of the Whiskey Warriors, I won't name names, received an aloe plant. And when the person who dropped off the aloe plant dropped it off, or at least copped to being the one who dropped it off, they said they put soul in it. And I'm not exactly sure whether it's S-O-U-L or S-O-L-E, like as in a fish. But I decided to ask Leo, because Leo is an AI through Brave. And here is what Leo says. Now, granted, I put in S-O-U-L, but it said, okay, the concept of the soul in relation to aloe vera varies significantly between physical, metaphorical interpretations and specific mystical traditions. However, in the physical and metaphorical healing thought process, aloe vera is viewed as a soul healer, S-O-U-L healer, or spiritual rejuvenator. Now, its physical abilities to soothe burns and repair skin is metaphorically extended to healing emotional wounds and refreshing the spirit. Apparently, aloe symbolizes resilience, inner peace, and tranquility, serving as a reminder to nurture not only the inner self and find balance amidst adversity. Apparently, mystical and occult beliefs in specific mystical frameworks, particularly within Jamaican mysticism and ancient practices, aloe vera is believed to interact directly with the soul. Okay? So, there you go. Apparently, the aloe plant is also supposed to be a soul healer. So there you go. The more you know. Anyway, see, now that's one of the benefits of having AI. I'm just saying. Anyway. All right. Well, let's get on to tonight. Tonight, let's see. Oh, yes, definitely not Karen is up for tonight's pledge. So if you are of mine, please stand, remove your hat, if you're wearing one, like me. Place your hand over your heart and follow along with Definitely Not Karen as he I made my closed captioning go crazy. Follow along with Definitely Not Karen as he recites the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and of course I thank you, Definitely Not Karen, for that wonderful rendition of the Pledge. If you would like to hear your rendition played here on the program, all you need to do is record yourself reciting or performing the pledge in your style. Take that audio file, video file, whatever kind of file, and attach it to an email. Send it off to me. Send it to fans, FANS, at AmericanPerspective.online. That's fans, FANS, at AmericanPerspective.online. And I will get you into the rotation. I have 24 of them. I'd like to get 26 by the end of 2026. So if two of you people out there who listen to me regularly, and frankly, I don't really care if you listen regularly or not, but if you do want to submit, then please do so. If you use your phone to record it, you can utilize the share option. That's the SHARE option. And you'll be able to share it to me at fans, FANS, at AmericanPerspective.online. Now, if you're over on Rumble, you'll notice I have a spelling error in the title. Yes, I left off an S. It's fine. I'll fix it afterward. Anyway, let's get going to tonight's headline sponsor, which is none other than, extremely surprising drum roll here, none other than theflagshirt.com. I'm wearing the Stars and Stripes themed flag shirt. 3 Chevy, I need to fix it right now. No! No. Fix it now! No, I'm not going to fix it now. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes, theflagshirt.com. Head on over to theflagshirt.com. Now, you're not going to get it, likely, not going to get your shirts by Independence Day. Unfortunately, that was last week. You should have picked them up then. But that's okay, because you can still deck yourself out in patriotic style, like me, for the 250th anniversary year here at theflagshirt.com. Just head on over there, look at their men's, women's, kids' styles, made in the USA's, patriotic accessories, all kinds of things. All kinds of things. In the red, white, and blue, you can go and check it out at theflagshirt.com. And if you order $75 or more of their product, they will provide you with free shipping. So head on over to theflagshirt.com and get yourself patriotized. All right. Yeah, my unofficial producer. Oh, my unofficial producer says to fix it now, too. Well, sorry. Not going to happen. They don't pay me enough. It's not like I'm already doing like 2 jobs. Anyway. All right. Let's talk about the Supreme Court. Now, folks, for anybody that sits there and thinks anytime, anywhere, thinks that this is a 100% conservative Supreme Court, I am going to tell you, no, it's not. It is conservative leaning in some cases, but in many cases, you actually have a conservative, a moderately conservative, and then moderate, and then activist on the Supreme Court. If I did my math right, that should have come out like that. So yeah, there you go. And apparently the boss is saying, I don't get any more time off. Shucks. Anyway, back on the Supreme Court. So we had a mix of opinions today, but not everything. So apparently tomorrow they have, I believe it's 4 cases left. The big one, which I'm calling the big one, is the birthright citizenship case. And that one is probably going to be delivered. The opinion, anyway, is probably being written and delivered by none other than one of the somewhat moderates, Chief Justice John Roberts. Now, there are, I believe, 2 cases that have to deal with transgenders in women's sports. Those have not been delivered yet either. And then, of course, you have some other case. There's a 4th one, and I honestly can't remember what it is. But those 3 are like the big 3. Now that we've gotten out the ones that have to deal with Trump's ability to be the executive that have come forth. And, of course, the elections day case. So that's all that came out today. And the first one here is that the justices actually, and this is where I'm telling you the moderates are kind of like they blow with the wind. And sometimes you'll get them to actually do something constitutionally conservative. And then other times they'll, scoot toward the left. Those guys are pretty much Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and John Roberts, for sure. You have a middle-of-the-road moderate conservative in Gorsuch, because Gorsuch tends to lean more conservative than the other 3. And then you have, of course, the conservative justices, or the strict constitutionalist justices, which are Thomas and Alito. And then you have the 3 activists, Kagan, Sotomayor, and the idiot of the group, Jackson. Although any one of those 3 at any given time could be given the award of idiot of the group, because all 3 of them are like, they kind of want to shift positions. They're like trying to fight for last place in terms of the brains department. And I will have to admit that it's usually between either Jackson and Sotomayor, but occasionally Kagan gets in there and does stuff. But I digress. This first case is a positive for President Trump. It's a positive. And the reason why is because it actually affirmed that Donald Trump is the executive, that Donald Trump has the ability to fire people for no reason. He doesn't need a reason. And this came out in a 6-3. So all of the moderates jumped on the bandwagon with Donald Trump and said, yes, the executive can fire whatever he wants, which is constitutionally correct. That the courts can't get involved, that this is an executive branch function, and it is basically a separation of powers function. And there you go. That's it. That's all there is to it. Now, what's interesting, though, is that they actually, in terms of that, and by the way, John Roberts wrote that one. I kind of refuse to call him Chief Justice because realistically, he shouldn't be the Chief Justice. Thomas should be the Chief Justice. But I digress. Now, with this ruling, it actually overturned a landmark 1935 precedent that it basically came up with the idea that there are agencies that are independent of the presidency. Now, I've read the Constitution multiple times. I've referred to it on this show multiple times. And, well, I don't think I've ever seen anything in there that basically says, there are agencies that are being set up or that can be set up by Congress that are independent of the executive, that the executive has no control over. I'm still trying to figure this out because I don't think that's in the Constitution. It doesn't say it. And how Congress can set something up via law, via legislation, and not have the executive execute that law and have control over its execution is kind of a little wobbly to me. That makes absolutely no sense. But apparently, after handing down the Trump versus Slaughter decision, where it basically said, yeah, Donald Trump can fire them completely at will, anytime, any way, whatever, they immediately came out with the next one, which is, well, apparently the Federal Reserve is a independent body to where Trump can't fire people who are on the board of the Federal Reserve. And again, I'm kind of like scratching my head in terms of how is it that he has plenary power over in quote unquote independent agencies, and I'm putting those in air quotes because there really aren't any, but yet he can't fire anybody out of the Federal Reserve. Now, we have to look a little deeper in the opinion in order to really and truly understand this, because the opinion didn't say that he couldn't fire her. The opinion just basically said, well, yes, she's in having a case brought against her of mortgage fraud. And so you let her go before litigation continues. And therefore, well, we're just going to keep the fact that there is an injunction on you to allow her to continue to serve until she gets the outcome of that litigation. So, yeah, that's kind of curious as to how they came up with that idea. Now, the thing about it is this particular case, which is Fed v. Cook, or actually I should say Trump v. Cook, this case actually ended up being a 5-4 decision, where Chief Justice John Roberts, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, Brett Kavanaugh, and Ketanji Brown Jackson all said, well, you can't fire her just yet. However, Justice Thomas, Amy Coney Barrett, and Alito with Gorsuch all basically said, well, no, we don't agree with this. So basically what happened here is Kavanaugh and John Roberts, again, the moderates, okay, the moderates kind of said, well, you know, the Federal Reserve is actually a little unique, even though we didn't have a Federal Reserve necessarily, but that the Federal Reserve is a unique historical exception to the rule that the president can fire anybody at any time. Again, I'm still trying to understand where in the Constitution it says the Federal Reserve is a separate body that is, independent of the presidency. Still trying to figure that one out, but whatever. Anyway, the court explained, by the way, that the cause must be interpreted in light of the Federal Reserve's unique role and history. Whether cause exists depends on the seriousness of the misconduct, that relationship to official duties, and whether or not the stated reason genuinely shows unfitness rather than serving as a pretext for replacing an independent policymaker. Now, again, this is my problem. There is no independent policymaker. Congress makes the law. The executive executes the law. The judicial interprets the law as to whether or not the law is constitutional. That's it. There's nothing else special here. There's no Congress makes the law, the executive interprets and executes the law. However, the executive doesn't have control over an independent body when Congress makes up an independent body. There's none of that in the Constitution. And I would love for some leftist lunatic to try and tell me where the independency actually is. Now, granted, you could make the argument that Congress has control over the Federal Reserve because the Federal Reserve has to deal with money. The same thing with, you can make the argument over the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. But again, I go back to the point that while Congress has the power, it does not say in the Constitution that Congress has the power to delegate to other places and other things its responsibilities. Well, again, it's kind of curious as to how this is kind of working out. Now, obviously, Clarence Thomas and Alito, being the most conservative, they would have been the ones to basically say, no, Congress creates the laws, the executive executes the laws, and therefore the executive has plenary authority to figure out how and who implements these things. So anyway, like I said, this one was a close one. It was a 5-4 split. Now, all of that being said, that was Trump's plenary power. And like I said, that was a split decision. It was, one went the proper way, the correct way, the Trump way. The other one did not. Well, now we come to the idea of ballots arriving after Election Day. Now, many people thought that this case would essentially resolve the question as to whether or not Election Day is Election Day, because of the fact that the state law, the Mississippi state law, permitted late arriving ballots to be counted. Well, unfortunately, folks, the Supreme Court, in a split decision, 5-4, decided to uphold that Mississippi law. And basically what the court said is, essentially, that as long as they are postmarked, meaning there's some definition of when it was sent, and that as long as it was sent before Election Day was over, meaning that it could be postmarked on Election Day, that basically anything that gets sent and arrives late, as long as it was postmarked, it should be fine. And that's the problem. So the federal election day law, according to the courts, focuses on when the ballots are actually cast, not when they must be received. So, now obviously this is a blow to Trump. However, what this has done is that has essentially kicked up again the drive for the SAVE Act. Because as you recall, part of the SAVE Act was basically to ban mail-in balloting across the board unless you have a legitimate reason, i.e., you're going to be traveling, you're off fighting a war or something like that, and or you're disabled or sick and can't get to a voting booth. All right. So, yeah, this one again was a 5-4. This one was actually a split. This one was actually a split. Now, Amy Coney Barrett wrote the majority opinion in the case. Joining the majority, and this is where we get things kind of screwed up, was Chief Justice John Roberts, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. So there's your 5. And, of course, everybody else said no. They dissented or didn't agree. Anyway. So, there you go. Alito, Clarence Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh dissented. Now, I haven't read the dissenting opinions, honestly. I haven't. And, you know, just to go to that election day law, it basically does say that's when they're cast. It doesn't say anything about when they're received. Because believe it or not, when that was set up, there was no mail-in balloting. There was no mail-in balloting at the time. And so, you know, now, again, honestly, all of this can be erased and be completely irrelevant if Congress would just basically say, hey, you know what? Because Congress has the constitutional authority to make or alter election regulations at any time. So if Congress can pass the SAVE Act and keep the no mail-in ballots unless specific cases come up, then all of this is moot. So, again, I mean, you know, in terms of my opinion, this probably fell about the way that I figured that it would. I mean, I would have liked to have seen a 6-3, but 5-4, yeah, that makes it. And I would have liked to see a 6-3 result. The 6-3 usually breaks along political lines. So the conservatives and moderates tend to wrangle together, and then you have the 3 idiots. But anyway. Well, Justice Alito, he took the decision and basically said, well, this is a bit of a problem. And that there could be some challenges here because of that, because of the possibility of fraud coming in. So, yeah. You basically, Amy Coney Barrett, I'll get to Alito in a minute here. Amy Coney Barrett said that this is not a case about the Constitution. We do not consider the scope of Congress's authority to regulate federal elections. The sole question before us is whether counting ballots postmarked by Election Day but received up to 5 days later violates the federal Election Day statutes. And she basically says, well, there's nothing in the statutes that actually preempts this. Because what she says She goes, federal election day statutes simply regulate the time of the election, which is true when you actually read it. When you actually read it, that's what it says, is it regulates the time of the election. Because as you recall, historically speaking, there was no actual election day. There were state laws that allowed you to vote 30 days. They had 30 days available. Some states were voting, 2 weeks. Others were voting the entire 30 days or more, 60 days. There were some that were coming in, having their elections, a full month ahead of any other states. And that ended up being a problem because they basically announced their winners and that would influence the other states. So yeah, there's a big problem with not having a singular day. The challenge is, though, that the wording of the statute says that it will be election day, not how long it takes you to count. Because the relevant federal statutes determine when the electorate must make its choice, not when the ballots are actually received and counted. So there you go. Yeah. Anyway, Alito, who dissented along with Thomas, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, torched them. Torched the five, and basically emphasized at the outset that if ballots received after Election Day are added to the set of ballots that dictate the election's outcome, the electorate's choice does not actually occur on Election Day, and the federal Election Day statutes are violated. So there appears to be an argument over when the electorate actually casts their votes. Is it when the person individual casts their vote, or when it's opened? Do you consider the vote cast? Alito goes, the acceptance of these late arriving ballots effectively postpones the date on which the electorate's choice is made, and federal law precludes that postponement. He also further emphasized that for most of America's history, the expectation was that the votes were received and American elections were decided on Election Day. He writes, 2 centuries of historical practice reinforce the proposition that holding an election on a particular day means that poll workers had to receive the ballots by that date. From this country's founding until the late 20th century, Election Day ballot collection was the near uniform practice, with only a few late-arriving exceptions. Alito noted that this was the case even when the Civil War took soldiers hundreds of miles from their usual polling places. In his scathing critique of the majority's opinion, Alito also accused his colleagues of attempting to fend off 2 centuries of American election practice, and noted that when Congress enacted the 3 Election Day statutes, having the election on a particular date meant that ballots would be collected by that date. Alito stressed that the ruling not only threatens to produce lamentable consequences and a slurry of troubling election law questions, but also leaves open opportunities for voter fraud that may further undermine Americans' faith in the integrity of this country's elections. He said, when someone votes by mail, it is harder for officials to verify the identity of the person requesting and completing the ballot. Mail voting also presents a greater opportunity for voter manipulation, a more vulnerable chain of custody, and diminished ability to detect improprieties in real time. Today's decision compounds these vulnerabilities, allowing absentee ballots to pour in over the days and weeks after the election day, by which point preliminary election returns are being publicly reported, I should say, creates greater opportunity for fraud and risks further undermining the public's confidence in election integrity. So there you go. There you go. So actually, I do have a question, and Bonnie sort of popped this up in the. She goes, now it is January before they really know because you cannot trust the post office now. So here's the thing, and I have a question for Justice Amy Coney Barrett. What happens if a ballot gets stuck in a machine somewhere? Let's say 100 ballots get stuck in a machine somewhere, and you have an election that is decided by less than those 100 ballots. And a couple days later, the post office figures out that, oh, there's a jam, or these ballots showed up. Well, let's continue them on to their location. How is it that the election cycle, when do you determine the election cycle is completed? When all ballots that are cast are counted? Or when all of the ballots show up? Because that brings up an additional question. How are you going to know how many people are actually voting? At what point is the process considered concluded? Because based off of this decision, we have an election day. And as long as the postmark demonstrates, and this is what they're going by, as long as the postmark demonstrates that it was cast, meaning put in the mail at the proper time to get the postmark, how is it that you're going to know when the election is over? Are you going to know that you sent out, just for ease of math here, 100,000 votes, and you only received 99,999 back? Do you have to wait until that final ballot comes in? How is this going to look in terms of, again, when do you consider, okay, the election's finished now? Because we've gotten every single ballot back that we created and sent out. See, this basically just opens up a whole can of worms in terms of when you deal with mail-in balloting, at what point do you determine, oh, the election's over? 5 years down the line, somebody finds the ballots in a tucked-in corner of a closet somewhere, and now all of a sudden, you have, oh, well, remember that 2020 election? Well, you know what? We found another 100,000 ballots in Fulton County, Georgia. Well, it was actually 315. But 300,000 ballots in Fulton County, Georgia that were mishandled and misappropriated, miscounted. They shouldn't have even counted. Well, here it is, 2028 presidential election. Does that mean you're going to go back and go, okay, well, for 2020, it should have been Donald Trump. So now Donald Trump can't run again in 2024 because he actually won in 2020, even though there was another guy who was considered president. I mean, seriously. Seriously. Where is this going to go? I mean, The reality of the situation, of course, is that Congress must pass the SAVE Act. And this is something that Trump has basically been saying, is he's like, yeah, okay, so now because of the fact that we can't stop when they arrive, we now need to make sure that the SAVE Act gets passed. We have to make sure it's more important than ever to pass the Save America Act. And he's right. He called out the House of Representatives has approved it 3 different times, and that the Senate seems to be unable to actually pass it even once. Donald Trump calls out the truth, which is essentially in a time where there is a powerful communist movement taking place in our country, one far more dangerous than in World War I, World War II, September 11th. The 5 Republican holdouts, Murkowski, Collins, Tillis, Cassidy, and McConnell, must vote to save our country. There can be no more excuses, he says. Now, Collins has been supportive of the Save America Act. However, she voted against the push to attempt to attach it to the Secure America Act reconciliation bill earlier this month. Cassidy has been supportive of the bill, but he recently expressed skepticism about its ability to pass. He basically says there's just not enough votes. Well, there would be if you ignored the filibuster or forced them into a talking filibuster. Force the Democrats into a talking filibuster. If anything is more in line with the constitutional requirements of what Congress does, in particular the Senate, and if anything is not ever more in line than this particular making sure that Americans have confidence in the integrity of our elections, this would be it. Force the Senate to do the talking filibuster. Force them to filibuster for 40, 60, 90, 120, however many days. I guarantee you it's probably not going to go that long, because even still today, the plurality of Americans, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, or independents, they all of them want this to be passed. Remember, 71% of Democrats, 83% of all, and 89% of Republicans all say the same thing. They want voter ID. Period. Anyway. Okay. So there was one more case that got decided. And this one, I'm kind of on the fence about. So the Supreme Court, if you'll recall, there is this warrant that is colloquially called a geofence warrant, which is essentially where the government asks the phone companies, in this particular case, it had to deal with Google Android users, that they essentially are asking these companies like Google, hey, we need to be able to look at the location history of all of the cell phones that were in a specific, 2-block radius of this site or 4-block radius of this address or whatever. And the question that was before the court is whether or not that geofence warrant was considered to be a privacy question, for an example, under the Fourth Amendment, which is the Fourth Amendment has to deal with unreasonable searches and seizures. See, the question was asked hey, can police access these location history places through Google, being a Fourth Amendment, since an individual has a reasonable expectation of privacy in his cell phone location information? Well, this is another one that was sort of the supposedly conservative justices threw us under the bus. So what happened here is Kagan wrote the majority opinion. John Roberts, Sotomayor, Brett Kavanaugh, Ketanji Brown Jackson, they joined the majority opinion. Neil Gorsuch filed a separate opinion, but concurred with the outcome. Now, whenever Gorsuch does this just basically means that, well, the outcome was right in his mind. The outcome was correct, but how you guys got there was not correct. And here's why. He's done this in the past. This is why I'm saying that he is sort of a moderate conservative there. But Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Amy Coney Barrett dissented on this one. Kagan wrote in her opinion that the Fourth Amendment was designed to place obstacles in the way of too permeating of a police surveillance. Now, she is basically remanding it back to the lower courts with the proviso that the lower courts ascertain and determine whether or not the police followed essentially a 3-step process, which she outlined. And basically what it was is step 1 was that Google provided only anonymized data. Then, as within, 150 meters of the crime, 30 minutes before it occurred to 30 minutes after. Then the police would narrow down the likely suspects from other information that they had. And then the second step, the Google would provide more anonymized information, but only on the specifics as things got closer and closer. And then when the police narrowed down the list to essentially 3 possible cell phones, then Google provided the identifying information on all 3 users. That's how it happened. And basically, according to her opinion, she said, well, as long as they actually followed that 3-step process, shouldn't be a problem. My big issue, though, on something like this is what happens when somebody petitions for, hey, Ancestry.com, because, everybody's gone and they've done those DNA tests. And I say everybody, but not everybody, but many people have. Or you go and you ask like another specific database, whether it's Ancestry or History.com, not History.com, but anyway, you get my point. Ancestry is the one that I can think of. So Ancestry.com, they go and they petition Ancestry and they say, hey, you know what? We have DNA from this murder. We have the murderer's DNA on file, but we can't find it. It's not already in the databases that we are aware of. And so I want, as the police, I'm going to say, hey, everybody who lived in the state of Maryland where this occurred, I'm going to put a GeoDNA warrant out and say, give me all of the anonymous information on this DNA that came from the state of Maryland from the years 2020 to 2025, and it has to include this genome sequence. Is that basically what we're down to? Where I volunteer my DNA to a ancestry company, my private information to a private company. I'm handing that over to a private company, and I'm entrusting them with identifying markers that police can use in order to track me down specifically. And we're now saying that this geofence warrant, which I'm questioning, because again, we're looking at this whole idea that, you can't specifically state, because again, keep in mind, a warrant must specifically state where you think the item is, what the item is, in specifics. You can't just go in for a generic warrant. And I feel like these geofence warrants are sort of generic, because they're basically saying, hey, give me everything, Google, give me everything on your Android users that are in that space. Oh yeah, we saw that the bank robber in this case, we saw the bank robber was using a Samsung Android cell phone. So we need to identify everybody who was in that space at that period of point in time who was using an Android Samsung cell phone. Well, how would that be any different than me going and saying, hey, we have identified markers on the killer. The killer must have brown hair and blue eyes based off of its, well, I don't know if you're going to get that combination. But anyway, the point is brown hair and blue eyes. And I need everything in your database that has a person who has the DNA markers for brown hair and blue eyes. How is that any different? I'm not exactly sure I follow with the whole idea that these geofence warrants are actually correct. They're sort of in a gray area, and I'm not really happy about that. Private information is either private or it's not. So it's a little questionable, let's just say. All right. Well, moving away from SCOTUS, we actually have a law that has now been put into place. I got to tell you, Texas, man, don't mess with Texas. Florida's almost there as well. Florida's up there as well. But Texas, I don't know if anybody caught this, but the Texas Board of Education approves a required reading list that has actually Bible passages on it. Now, the list of roughly 200 texts takes effect for the 2030 to 2031 school year for elementary students. Now, this is stories in the Bible, for an example, like things like, the David and Goliath story, as an example. So, yeah. So the Bible experts had things like the Good Samaritan story, Noah's Ark, the prodigal son, Jonah and the whale. All of these stories that are a part of it, that are in the list of the Texas State Board of Education approved required reading list. Yeah. Well, the leftists, of course, are upset about it. Now, what's sad about all of this, though, is that when you actually look at things like, Charles Dickens or any other major work of books, in order to understand Western civilization, you have to have at least some understanding or some reconciliation and recognizing Bible verses and Bible stories in order to understand Western civilization, because most of Western civilization, if not all, has been built off of Judeo-Christian values and principles. And that's the problem. Is that, according to the left, the Judeo-Christian values, man, that's just absolutely horrible according to the left. But you need to have at least a rudimentary understanding of some of the biblical pretexts in order to understand Western civilization. And that leads me to my next topic. This is actually an opinion piece, although this is very true. Where did the idea of this endowed by our Creator, the Declaration of Independence, which we're celebrating 250 years since its signing on Saturday, where did this idea come from? Endowed by our Creator. And unfortunately, what a lot of people on the left don't seem to understand is that America itself is based foundationally in Judeo-Christian values, principles, and beliefs. See, the thing about it is that the idea of a creator, even Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Virginia Religious Compact, we talked about that on this program. Even Thomas Jefferson, who was not one who actually believed in what was known as the revealed God of the Bible, but more of the natural God, meaning that God reveals himself through natural works. They all, every single one of them, of the creators, or of the founders, agreed on the fact that there was divine influence. Something going on here. Divine influence. And that science actually points toward this. Because there's things like physics. As an example, we talked about it on the program a long time ago. We talked about that one singular, very specific number that shows up in physics, mathematics, and shows up in a couple of other disciplines. And that if that one specific number was off kilter just a little bit, that the entire universe would basically implode on itself. Now, it's things like that you look at and you kind of think to yourself, well, wow, that didn't happenstance. One singular number showing up in like 3 or 4 different places that we are aware of at this time. That singular number being so specific and long, multiple digits long, that one singular multiplier shows up in different areas that you cannot have a place like the Earth and all of our science laws that we have available without even considering the idea of a intelligent creation, intelligent design. And it's things like this that people don't seem to understand, that America itself is singular in the fact that we have Judeo-Christian values and beliefs that formulated this great nation, and that we are inexorably tied to those Judeo-Christian values and beliefs. And that everything that we have seen from science, history, we're now starting to find things out about the Bible that are true, like places where Jesus actually walked, where Jesus, the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus was before being crucified, his tomb. There's the possibility, a very good and real possibility, of the finding of the Ark of the, not the Ark of the Covenant, but Noah's Ark in Turkey. There is just so much that we are still finding out, but yet all tie back to an intelligent design and an intelligent creator. That there's no way that you can sit here and tell us, at least in my mind, that the earth was just created out of nothing. And that our existence here is just happenstance. Yeah, we just happened to get lucky. The goo just came together in the right way, and there you are. Sorry, I don't agree. Alrighty, folks, that is it for me for this evening. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, head on over to rumble.com, get yourself an account. It is free. And once you are signed up and signed in, make sure that you search up the American Perspective channel and hit that green follow button to get notified every time that I go live. Also, don't forget on your way out to give me a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or in the case of 3 Chevy, a thumb sideways or at an angle across all of my platforms, whether it's X, YouTube, Facebook, or, of course, the aforementioned Rumble. We will see you tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on American Perspective. Have a great rest of your evening, and good night, everybody.